Hey everybody, welcome back to Bitcoin Math. So today we're going to run through the home purchase calculator. I want to give you a high level example of how this works and how to use the tool, what all the different outputs mean, and how to really just make sense of everything that's happening within this particular simulation. So down here under OPM and strategic financing, you'll see home purchase. We're going to go ahead and open that calculator up. So to kind of set the stage here, the reason why we made this calculator is because we oftentimes see so many people who save up 10%, 15%, even 20% or more in their own hard-earned cash, or economic energy as we like to say, to use as a down payment to buy their forever home. And this makes perfect sense, right? A lot of times making your first home purchase is because you are starting a family, or it's a major milestone in your life. It's very important, and you might also think of it as an investment strategy, right? Real estate has performed pretty well over the past 20 plus years, but when you look at the returns that you typically see from real estate investments, it tends to be between 3, 4, 5, maybe sometimes 7% depending on the region, which again, that seems like a decent return. Plus, you need a place to live anyway, so it kind of checks a couple of boxes. But what most people I don't think understand is that there's a lot of programs set up through the federal government to help buying your first home be easier, right? Be more cost effective, be easier to manage. The federal government is incentivized to get more people to buy homes. It stimulates economic activity. It helps transfer asset ownership between different people within the system. That generates capital gains, taxes, and things of that nature for them. So while it might not be obvious at face value, the government is motivated to help more people buy more homes ongoing, especially as the prices of homes increases. So what does this mean? Well, it means that if you were to apply to buy your first home or your primary residence, then you likely qualify for an FHA-backed loan. So the Federal Housing Authority, FHA, they have subsidized mortgages through banks and other lenders, which makes it easier for those lenders to get first-time buyers approved, and therefore requires a smaller down payment so that people can actually afford to make these purchases. So in this scenario, what we're going to look at is, well, okay, how does this look if I take out, say, 3.5% to buy the house versus if I put down 10% as a cash down payment? And we're going to look at the differences of these two scenarios. In the one scenario where you're taking out the minimum down payment required, which is 3.5%, your monthly payment will be higher and you will spend more on interest, yes. But if you saved up $100,000 for a down payment, but you only needed, say, 20, and you could spend the other 80 on a performing asset like Bitcoin or even gold or stocks or whatever it might be, how does that look over a longer period of time? And that's what we want to take a look at. So basic inputs here, we're going to say this is a $500,000 house. Let's say we saved up $100,000. Right? That's a 20% down payment. And again, if this is your primary residence or the first time you're buying a home, you likely qualify for an FHA-backed loan, which may only require 3.5%. Let's go ahead and just say we're going to borrow at 6%. And then there's a checkpoint year, so you can say, okay, how does this strategy look over the first, let's call it 10 years? Now we're going to assume it's a 30-year mortgage, and we're going to assume that your house is appreciating at 5% per year compounding. Now, let's say over the course of this 10 years that we want to evaluate, we think Bitcoin's CAGR is going to be 29%, which is Saylor's base case. We're going to set that, and then voila, we see the outputs. Now, there's a lot of data here, so we'll just kind of go through this section by section. Now, at the very top, what you're going to see is the amount down, right? And so for the TradFi scenario, well, you saved up $100,000 and you're going to put $100,000 down. And And that means you're going to have to borrow $400,000 because you're putting $100,000 down on the $500,000 house. The next couple line items are going to be your monthly principal and your monthly interest. This is using an amortized schedule. So these numbers will change over time, but the total monthly payment will not change. That will remain the same. And then your total interest and principal allocations will fluctuate because of the amortization schedules that banks and mortgage lenders use. Now, if we jump over to the Bitcoin scenario, we're automatically going to chop this down payment down to just 3.5%, right? So we're assuming that you get approved for that FHA loan, 3.5%. That means you're going to borrow quite a bit more. You're going to borrow $482,500, and that means your monthly principal and your monthly interest are going to go up. So now that mortgage payment is going to be $2,892. And that's not an insignificant number, right? So sure, you are going to pay more in your monthly payment for this house. And if we go to the next set of line items, over the course of this 10-year checkpoint period we're looking at, yeah, you're going to spend more on total interest as well because, well, you borrowed more, therefore you're paying interest on a larger amount of money. But now let's move to the next section, because in the traditional scenario, you didn't have any money left over with your 100 grand because you put it all into the house. But in the Bitcoin scenario, you actually took that other 82.5, and at a Bitcoin price of 117,686, that got you 0.7 Bitcoin. And if we use the 29% compound annual growth rate here times the 10 years in this checkpoint period, at the end of this 10 years, that Bitcoin's actually now worth a little over $1 million. Okay? So in the next section, you've paid more principal here on the loan where you borrowed more. You spent more money on interest as we showed up top. So your actual equity value is not going to be as high here because, well, you didn't invest as much, because every dollar you invested in that down payment, that's pretty much instant equity. So sure, you've got more equity in your house if you use a larger down payment after this 10-year period. But how does this translate to your total asset value? Well, in the traditional scenario, you've got just your home equity because that's really the only asset that you're holding is the house. And we're also going to factor in the interest savings because you paid less interest in this scenario. So we'll consider that a savings in comparison to the Bitcoin scenario. But in the Bitcoin scenario, despite having less home equity, you've also got this $1 million in Bitcoin value, making your total assets worth a little over $1.2 million. And so when we compare your net asset value here at this 10-point period, they're really not even close, right? Now, again, this is hypothetical. So if things didn't happen this way, then obviously this model will be different. But that's also the power of this tool. You can change this to whatever you want, right? What would happen if Bitcoin only did a 15% compound annual growth rate? Well, it still outperforms. Well, what if it did 50, right? What does that look like, right? The numbers start to get pretty crazy, but that's really the benefit of these tools, is that it just allows you to easily kind of configure this and look at it through a number of different ways. But the TLDR here is that if you are investing all of your cash into an asset that appreciates at 5% per year, that's always going to underperform in the long term compared to something where you're investing most of your cash in an asset that's even getting you 10% per year, right? And that's really the concept of using OPM, other people's money. You're using more of the bank's money here to buy the asset so that you can use your hard-earned cash, your $100,000, to go out and invest in performant assets, which in this case we believe is Bitcoin. Okay? Now, what happens if we change this to, say, the first 5 years? How does that look? Well, it still looks pretty good. What happens if we change it to the whole 30-year term? Right? Things start to get pretty wild, especially if we think we might hit Saylor's bear case over that entire 30-year period. You're dramatically changing the potential outcome here by using OPM and by investing more of your hard-earned cash into performant assets like Bitcoin, instead of just dumping all of your cash into the house as a down payment. Yes, you will save some money monthly on your mortgage. That is true. You will pay more monthly by doing it this way. Yes. All those things are factors that you absolutely need to consider. And this is obviously not financial advice because we're not financial advisors, and this is all hypothetical, but hopefully this gives you a way of thinking about it and understanding it in a way that looks more at the long term, looks at growth, and looks at the different scenarios and how you can put your money to work for you in a way that might be better than, just investing in an asset that historically has only returned about 5% value. Whereas if we look at Bitcoin and its performance over the long haul, right, you can look at these CAGR metrics here for Bitcoin, for gold, and for S&P 500, and you've got some pretty impressive numbers, even going back 10 years, right, averaging 87% compound annual growth for the past 10 years, and that is, again, compounding. So that's it for this video. If you have questions or feedback, or you just want to get in touch to say hello, we make that really easy. Go ahead and do that. Happy to get back to you with information as we are able. And with that, we will see you on the next one.